Start again.
Here's a little trivia question. What year was the Constitution written? Don't know? Well, according to a poll from the Woodrow Wilson Foundation, they found that only 15% of Americans knew the answer to this question. I'm currently in an American history class, and I've wondered how many of my fellow Americans would pass the American civics test. If we, as Americans, cannot pass a simple history test on our country, what is that to say for the future of our country? Therefore, I believe that every American should have to pass the American citizenship test before voting in federal and state elections. After today, you should call your representative in Congress and tell them they need to introduce this idea into law. The American civics test is the last step in becoming a U.S. citizen, and it is a 100-question test on American government and history. Some of the questions are: when was the Declaration of Independence signed? What are two major political parties in America? And who is the current vice president? These questions and many more, when given to the candidates for U.S. citizenship, are selected 10 at a time, and the candidate must answer 6 of the 10 correctly in order to become a U.S. citizen. Some states, including North Dakota, already make it a requirement to graduate, where they must pass the entire test, all 100 questions. Some historians and political scientists will use the term the ignorant vote when talking about a certain demographic of voters. This term is described according to Illa Soman, who wrote a book and many articles on this issue. And they are described as voters who have little to no knowledge of how the government works and what rights they have. Oftentimes, they will just look for the little denotation that says Republican or Democrat, and they'll vote the party line. I have put some thought into how my proposed idea would work. First, this proposition would eliminate voter registration in all states, where anyone who shows up to vote will receive a ballot. And if their grade on the selected test, on the selected questions, would be higher than 50%, their vote would be counted. But, however, this would only count for federal and state elections, seeing as it has no effect on local elections. Secondly, to ensure all Americans have a chance to review the questions that could be on the ballot 1 month prior to Election Day, much like the census, all 100 questions and their answers, along with study materials, would be mailed out to each U.S. resident. Lastly, this would open the door to allow for the popular vote to elect our presidents. This concern that Americans could not read nor write when the Constitution was written was the main principle that led the Founding Fathers to go from a democracy to a republic. However, by having Americans prove they are proficient in American civics, they would have asserted that they are knowledgeable enough to elect the president. Many people will say this new qualification is just modern voter suppression, but I feel strongly against that statement. Yes, there will be a large number of votes that will be invalid early on in the interpretation of these rules. But I feel that eventually Americans will become accustomed to this, and it will become a new American ritual, much like studying for the ACT or the SAT. Americans will now start to study for Election Day. Political analysts and historians will claim it's unconstitutional. This too is a valid point about the constitutionality of this proposal. But that is why the Founding Fathers opened the door to amendments to the single greatest document in American history. They left that door open to the Congress so that if the need arises, they can change or add things to the Constitution. And that is how this would come into law, is through amending the Constitution. And they would repeal the 26th Amendment and replace it to include this new requirement. Another way this might be battled is that the people and educators will ask, why history? Why not math? Why not science? To this, I only have one response. American civics and history make you an American. Civics people all around the world study math and science. But only in America is our history taught with such pride? The last way that people will debate this proposal is they will bring up the fact that not all history programs in American colleges and high schools are equal. Textbooks used and methods used differ from school to school, even in the same district. This is another valid point, as many colleges don't even offer a history class at all in their course lists. And many high schools use thousands of different texts from any age. But the answer to this question I've already dealt with. As I said, much like the census, 1 month before Election Day, study materials, pamphlets, all 100 questions and answers would be mailed out to each U.S. resident, regardless of citizenship status, criminal history, and it would be up to that individual citizen whether or not they study the materials given. One way we can use these ballots in the future is to hone in on where Americans struggle with our history and in schools and universities. We can look at how many Americans got this question right or wrong and can be used and be a useful tool for educators. Another way we can use these ballots is by using them to create a new method for electing the president, like I stated earlier. It would become an electoral college and popular vote hybrid, where each state would receive 10 more electoral votes. And these 10 votes would go to each candidate proportionally. Here's an example. Take North Dakota. We originally have 3 electoral votes. Under the new rule, we'd have 13. This new rule, the 3 original, would vote like normally. But the other 10 would be given out proportionally to each of the candidates. Say candidate X received 60% of the vote, and candidate Y received 40. Candidate X would receive 6 electoral votes, while candidate Y would receive 4. This new way that we can implement the popular vote would ultimately lead to more people voting and taking pride in voting. And it would increase the amount of people in the electorate all across the nation. Looking at both sides of this argument, the pros win out clearly on practicality and functionality. And the implementation of this policy will lead to a new sense of American patriotism and pride, the likes of this country has never seen before. If our legislature puts this idea into law, Americans will be inspired